The sun was setting over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as the massive cruise ship glided smoothly across the calm ocean waters. On board, Priya stood by the railing, her eyes scanning the endless expanse of water, while her heart swelled with happiness. It had been years since she last took a vacation, and this trip was special. It was meant to bring her family closer together. Her husband, Arjun, always busy with work, had finally taken time off, and their 6-year-old daughter Anaya was bubbling with excitement at every new sight and sound. Anaya darted around the deck, giggling as she chased seagulls that hovered nearby. Her curly hair bounced with each step, and her bright smile seemed to light up the entire ship. Arjun walked behind her, his camera ready to capture every moment. He paused occasionally to snap photos of Anaya laughing, of Priya gazing out at the sea, and even of random strangers enjoying themselves. They were creating memories, ones they hoped would last a lifetime. That evening after dinner, the family gathered on the upper deck for a small magic show organized by the crew. Anaya sat cross-legged on the floor, completely mesmerized, as the magician pulled colorful scarves out of thin air and made coins disappear. Arjun leaned back in his chair, chuckling softly at his daughter's wide-eyed wonder. Priya watched them both, feeling a rare sense of peace. For once, there were no deadlines, no school runs, no stress. Just the three of them, happy and carefree. But happiness can be fleeting, and fate has its own plans. The next morning, when Priya woke up in their cabin, she found it eerily quiet. At first, she thought nothing of it. Perhaps Arjun had taken Anaya to breakfast early or gone for a walk around the ship. But as the hours passed and neither returned, unease began to creep into her mind. She called out their names, searched the corridors, and asked other passengers if they'd seen them. No one had. Panic set in as Priya reported their disappearance to the ship's staff. A thorough search ensued, but despite all efforts, there was no trace of Arjun or Anaya anywhere. The captain assured her that such incidents were unheard of, yet the evidence, or lack thereof, spoke volumes. There were no signs of struggle, no clues left behind, nothing to indicate what might have happened. It was as though they had vanished into thin air. When the ship docked days later, authorities launched an extensive investigation. Divers scoured the waters, security footage was reviewed countless times, and interviews were conducted with everyone on board. Still, no answers came. The media picked up the story, plastering pictures of the smiling family across newspapers and television screens. Tips poured in from all over the world, but none led to anything concrete. For Priya, life became a blur of sleepless nights and unanswered questions. How could two people simply disappear without leaving a single clue? Where were they now? Were they safe? Or had something terrible happened? Every possibility haunted her dreams, turning her once peaceful existence into a living nightmare. Yet amidst the despair, a tiny flicker of hope remained. Deep down, she refused to believe that she'd lost them forever. Somewhere out there, she told herself, Arjun and Anaya were waiting to come home. Life after the disappearance of Arjun and Anaya was a heavy burden that Priya carried every single day. The once vibrant woman who laughed easily and loved deeply had become a shadow of her former self. Her mornings began with a hollow ache in her chest, the kind that no amount of coffee or routine could fill. She would wake up to an empty house, the silence pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't shake off. Every corner of her home reminded her of them, their laughter, their voices, the warmth they'd brought into her life. At first, Priya threw herself into the search for answers. She attended meetings with investigators, joined support groups for families of missing persons, and even traveled to places where someone claimed to have spotted Arjun or Anaya. But as weeks turned into months, and months stretched into years, the leads dried up. People stopped talking about the case. The media moved on to newer stories, and slowly, the world seemed to forget about the family that had vanished without a trace. Yet for Priya, forgetting was never an option. To keep herself from drowning in grief, she returned to teaching. a job she had left briefly after the tragedy. Standing in front of her students gave her a sense of purpose, even if it was fleeting. Watching their bright faces reminded her of Anaya, which was both comforting and painful. Sometimes, during recess, she'd sit alone under a tree, staring at the playground, imagining what Anaya might look like now. Would she still love butterflies? Would she still giggle uncontrollably at silly jokes? These thoughts were bittersweet, but they kept her going. On weekends, Priya volunteered at a local organization dedicated to finding missing children. Sorting through files, making phone calls, and organizing events helped her feel connected to others who understood her pain. It also gave her hope that one day, someone somewhere might find a clue that would lead her back to her daughter and husband. Despite everything, she refused to give up. But not all days were filled with determination. Some nights, when the house was quiet and the darkness pressed in, Priya allowed herself to cry. She cried for the birthdays she missed celebrating with Anaya, for the anniversaries she and Arjun should have shared, and for the future they had dreamed of together. On those nights, she clutched an old photo album close to her chest, flipping through pictures of happier times. There was one photo she always lingered on. It showed Anaya sitting on Arjun's shoulders, both of them laughing as they looked straight into the camera. That image became her anchor, proof that they had existed, that they had been real. Despite the pain, Priya tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She cooked meals, watered her plants, and occasionally met friends for tea. They never mentioned Arjun or Anaya unless she brought them up, knowing how raw the wound still was. "You're so strong," they often told her, but Priya didn't feel strong. She felt tired, exhausted, really, but quitting wasn't an option. Giving up meant letting go, and letting go felt impossible. One thing Priya avoided entirely was anything related to water. She couldn't bear to visit lakes, rivers, or beaches. Even watching movies set on ships made her heart race and her palms sweat. Once, a colleague suggested a team outing to a nearby beach resort. Priya politely declined, explaining that she wasn't comfortable near large bodies of water. No one pressed her for details. They knew enough to respect her boundaries. Still, despite the sadness and fear, Priya held onto a fragile thread of hope. Deep inside, she believed that Arjun and Anaya were alive somewhere, waiting for her to find them. She imagined scenarios where they were safe, perhaps stranded on an island or living under new identities due to circumstances beyond their control. In her mind, they were okay, and someday, somehow, they would return to her. Until then, she vowed to live each day fully, not just for herself, but for them too. After all, if she gave up completely, what would be left of the family they once were? It had been 7 long years since the world stopped making sense for Priya. Life had become a series of routines: wake up, teach, volunteer, sleep, and repeat. But deep down, she carried an ache that never faded, a quiet longing that whispered to her in the stillness of the night. She often wondered if she'd ever see Anaya again, or even catch a glimpse of someone who reminded her of her daughter. It was a foolish thought, perhaps, but it kept her moving forward. One chilly evening, after finishing work late at the school, Priya decided to take a shortcut through a narrow alley on her way home. The streets were dimly lit, and the air carried the faint smell of damp concrete and rusted metal. She pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, quickening her pace as the shadows seemed to stretch longer with each step. Normally, she avoided such alleys, especially after dark. But tonight, exhaustion outweighed caution. As she walked briskly, her heels clicking softly against the uneven pavement, something caught her eye: a figure sitting near a stack of old crates. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, just another person huddled in the cold, trying to stay warm. But then the figure shifted slightly, turning its face toward the flickering light of a distant street lamp. Priya froze mid-step, her breath catching in her throat. The girl looked about 13 or 14, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail, her clothes worn and mismatched. Her features were delicate, almost fragile, but there was something unmistakably familiar about her. Praya's heart began to race as memories flooded her mind. Could it be? Was this some cruel trick of the imagination, conjured by years of yearning? Or was it really Anaya? Praya whispered, her voice trembling. The name hung in the air like a fragile thread, waiting to either snap or pull her closer to truth. The girl flinched at the sound, startled, and turned her head sharply toward Praya. For a moment, their eyes met, and time seemed to stand still. The resemblance was uncanny. The same almond-shaped eyes, the same small nose, the same curve of her lips. It had to be her. Before Praya could take another step, a man emerged from the shadows, his presence sudden and menacing. He grabbed the girl roughly by the arm, yanking her to her feet. "What are you doing?" he barked, glaring at Praya. His tone sent shivers down her spine, but she couldn't look away from the girl. Tears welled up in the child's eyes as she struggled weakly against the man's grip, her gaze locked onto Praya's face. Praya's mind raced. Who was this man? Why was he treating the girl so harshly? And most importantly, why did the girl look so much like Anaya? Panic surged through her veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. If this truly was her daughter, she couldn't risk losing her again. Not now, not after all these years. "Let her go," Praya demanded, her voice stronger than she expected. The man sneered, tightening his hold on the girl's arm. "Mind your own business," he growled before dragging her further into the shadows. The girl stumbled along, casting one last desperate glance over her shoulder at Praya. That look pierced straight through Praya's soul. It was a plea for help, a silent cry for rescue. For a split second, Praya considered running after them, shouting for help or calling the police, but fear rooted her to the spot. What if she acted too rashly and put the girl in greater danger? What if this wasn't Anaya after all, and she made a terrible mistake? Her mind spun with questions, but one thing was certain. She couldn't let them disappear into the night without finding out the truth. Summoning every ounce of courage, Praya followed them quietly, keeping enough distance to avoid being noticed. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest as she trailed behind, her thoughts consumed by what she had just witnessed. Whoever that girl was, she was clearly in trouble, and if there was even the slightest chance she was Anaya, Praya knew she would do whatever it took to save her. Praya's legs felt like lead as she followed the man and the girl deeper into the labyrinth of narrow alleys. Her breath came in shallow gasps, not just from the physical exertion, but from the whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Fear, hope, desperation. They all collided inside her chest, making it hard to think clearly. Yet one thought burned brighter than the rest. What if that girl really is Anaya? The possibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. The man moved quickly, his grip firm on the girl's arm as he dragged her along. He glanced over his shoulder occasionally, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of pursuit. Praya ducked behind corners and pressed herself against walls whenever he turned around, her heart hammering so loudly she feared he might hear it. She stayed far enough back to remain unseen, but close enough to keep them in sight. As they ventured further into the alleyways, the surroundings grew darker and more desolate. Broken streetlights flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. Piles of trash lined the edges of the path, and the distant hum of traffic faded into silence. It was as though the world had shrunk to just these three figures: the man, the girl, and Praya, trapped in a tense game of cat and mouse. Finally, the man stopped in front of a dilapidated building. Its windows were boarded up, and graffiti covered its crumbling walls. He shoved the door open with his foot and pulled the girl inside, slamming it shut behind them. Praya hesitated outside, her mind racing. What should she do next? Should she call the police immediately? Or should she try to find out what was happening inside before alerting anyone? Time seemed to slow as she weighed her options. Her instincts screamed at her to act cautiously. If this truly was Anaya, and the resemblance was uncanny, rushing in blindly could put the girl in greater danger. But waiting too long might mean losing her forever. Priya clenched her fists, trying to steady her trembling hands. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. Not when she was so close. Taking a deep breath, she crept closer to the building, careful to stay hidden in the shadows. Through a gap in the boards covering one of the windows, she peered inside. What she saw made her blood run cold. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Several children, some no older than toddlers, sat huddled together on the floor, their faces pale and frightened. The girl who looked like Anaya was among them, sitting quietly with her knees drawn to her chest. Her wide eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't seem to exist. In the corner, two men whispered urgently to each other. One of them was the man who had brought the girl here, while the other appeared to be in charge. His voice was low but commanding, and every so often, he gestured toward the group of children. Priya strained to hear their conversation, catching snippets of words like shipment, buyer, and tonight. Her stomach churned as realization dawned on her. This wasn't just a random abduction. It was something far more sinister. These children were being held captive, likely destined to be sold off to the highest bidder. Tears pricked at the corners of Priya's eyes, but she blinked them away. There was no time for weakness. She needed to act, and fast. Pulling out her phone, she dialed emergency services, keeping her voice as calm and steady as possible despite the storm raging inside her. "There's a building near the old market district," she whispered urgently. "Several children are being held there against their will. Please hurry." After ending the call, Priya knew she couldn't leave. Not yet. She had to buy time until help arrived. Spotting a loose pipe lying nearby, she picked it up and used it to bang loudly against the side of the building. The noise echoed through the alley, startling the men inside. They exchanged alarmed glances before rushing toward the source of the sound, leaving the children unguarded. Seizing the opportunity, Priya slipped through the partially open door and entered the room where the children were kept. Her eyes locked onto the girl who resembled Anaya. "It's okay," she whispered softly, kneeling down beside her. "I'm here to help you." The girl stared at her, confusion mingling with fear in her expression. "Do I know you?" the girl asked hesitantly, her voice barely audible. Priya's heart skipped a beat. She reached out gently, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You do." Before either of them could say another word, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hallway. Priya grabbed the girl's hand and helped her stand. "We need to go. Now." Together, they hurried toward the exit, praying they wouldn't be too late. The sound of heavy footsteps grew louder, echoing ominously through the narrow hallway. Priya's pulse quickened as she gripped the girl's hand tightly, her mind racing to formulate a plan. They couldn't stay in the room. It was only a matter of seconds before the men returned and discovered them missing. Yet stepping back into the alley meant risking capture or worse. Every choice felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss, with no safety net below. "Come with me," Priya whispered urgently, pulling the girl toward a rusted metal door at the far end of the room. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years, but desperation gave her strength. She pushed against it with all her might, wincing as the hinges groaned in protest. To her relief, the door creaked open just wide enough for them to slip through. On the other side was a small storage area filled with crates and old furniture, offering some cover from prying eyes. Priya motioned for the girl to stay low as they hid behind a stack of wooden boxes. Her breathing was shallow, her ears straining to pick up any sound that might indicate their pursuer's location. The girl clung to her, trembling slightly but remarkably quiet given the chaos unfolding around them. For a moment, Priya allowed herself to glance at the child's face again. Even in the dim light, the resemblance to Anaya was uncanny. Her delicate features, the shape of her nose, even the way her eyebrows furrowed when she was scared. It was almost too much to bear. Back in the main room, the two men burst inside, their voices sharp with anger. What was that noise? One of them barked, his tone laced with suspicion. "Check the perimeter. Someone must have seen us." Their boots thudded heavily against the floor as they began searching the space. Priya held her breath, praying they wouldn't think to look in the storage area. "They're still here somewhere," the second man growled. "If anyone finds out about this operation, we're done for." His words sent a chill down Priya's spine. Operation. This wasn't just a random kidnapping. It was part of something bigger, more organized, and far more dangerous than she had initially realized. These men weren't amateurs. They were professionals who wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who got in their way. As the men moved closer to the storage room, Priya knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Thinking quickly, she scanned their surroundings for anything that could help. Her gaze landed on a large crate teetering precariously near the edge of a pile. If she timed it right, she could create a distraction, one loud enough to draw the men away and give them a chance to escape. "Stay here," she whispered to the girl, squeezing her hand reassuringly. Before the child could respond, Priya darted out from behind the crates and shoved the unstable box with all her strength. It toppled over with a deafening crash, sending shards of wood scattering across the floor. The noise reverberated through the building, startling the men and drawing their attention instantly. "What the hell was that?" one of them shouted, rushing toward the source of the commotion. The other followed close behind, leaving the storage area unguarded. Seizing the opportunity, Priya grabbed the girl's hand once more and led her out of their hiding spot. They moved swiftly but silently, sticking to the shadows as they navigated the maze-like corridors of the building. Every step felt like an eternity, each corner bringing the risk of running straight into danger. But Priya didn't falter. She focused on one thing, and one thing only: getting the girl to safety. As they neared the exit, she heard the distant wail of sirens cutting through the night air. Help was finally on its way. "We're almost there," Priya murmured, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. The girl nodded, her grip tightening on Priya's hand. For the first time since they'd met, a flicker of hope appeared in her eyes, a fragile, tentative spark that mirrored Priya's own determination. Reaching the door, Priya pushed it open cautiously, scanning the alley outside for any signs of trouble. The coast seemed clear. With one last glance over her shoulder to ensure they weren't being followed, she ushered the girl out into the cool night air. Behind them, the building loomed like a dark specter, its secrets soon to be exposed. But even as they stepped into the relative safety of the alley, Priya couldn't shake the feeling that their ordeal was far from over. Whoever these men were, whatever organization they worked for, they wouldn't let this go easily. Still, for now, they were safe. And that was enough. The sirens grew louder, their piercing wails slicing through the quiet night like a blade. Priya and the girl huddled together in the shadows of the alley, their breaths visible in the cold air as they tried to steady themselves after the harrowing escape. The girl clung to Priya's arm, her small frame trembling not just from the chill, but from the weight of everything she had endured. Priya wrapped an arm around her protectively, her eyes darting back toward the building they had fled. Inside, the men were shouting, their voices rising in panic as they realized the police were closing in. Someone tipped them off. One of them bellowed, his tone laced with fury. "Find whoever did this." The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the corridors, followed by the crash of furniture being overturned in their frantic search. Priya tightened her grip on the girl, pulling her deeper into the shadows. They couldn't afford to be seen. Not now. Not when they were so close to freedom. As the red and blue lights of patrol cars illuminated the alleyway, Priya finally allowed herself a moment to exhale. She knelt down beside the girl, brushing strands of hair away from her face. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "You're safe now." The girl looked up at her, her wide eyes filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Who are you?" the girl asked hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why? Why do you care about me?" Priya's heart clenched at the question. How could she explain the years of longing, the sleepless nights spent imagining this very moment? Instead, she simply smiled, a sad, tender smile, and said, "Because I've been looking for you for a very long time." Before the girl could respond, the sound of boots hitting pavements signaled the arrival of the police. Officers swarmed the area, weapons drawn as they surrounded the building. One of them approached Priya and the girl cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice calm but urgent. "What happened here?" Priya quickly explained what she had witnessed: the children being held captive, the men guarding them, the operation she overheard them discussing. The officer listened intently, his expression growing grimmer with each word. "Stay here," he instructed before signaling to his team to move in. Minutes later, shouts erupted from inside the building as the officers confronted the suspects. Doors slammed, and scuffles broke out before the two men were dragged out in handcuffs, their faces contorted with rage. Priya watched silently as they were loaded into a police van, her mind replaying everything that had transpired. These men might have been caught, but the thought of how many other children they had harmed, or worse, weighed heavily on her. Meanwhile, paramedics arrived to tend to the rescued children, who were led out of the building one by one. Some cried softly, clinging to blankets wrapped around their shoulders, while others stared blankly ahead, their young faces hardened by trauma. Priya scanned the group anxiously, searching for any sign of familiarity among them. But her attention kept returning to the girl beside her, the one who looked so much like Anaya. A female officer approached them, her demeanor kind but professional. "We need to get her statement," she said gently, gesturing toward the girl. "Can you tell us her name?" Priya hesitated, glancing at the girl. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I think she might be my daughter." The officer's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded understandingly. "Let's take this step by step," she said. "First, we'll confirm her identity. Then we can figure out the next steps." The girl looked between Priya and the officer, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Your daughter," she repeated slowly, as if testing the words on her tongue. "But I don't remember." "It's okay," Priya reassured her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to remember right now. Just trust me. I'm here to help you." As the officer guided them toward a waiting ambulance, Priya couldn't shake the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. Was this really Anaya, or was it simply wishful thinking clouding her judgment? Either way, one thing was certain. This girl needed protection, love, and answers, and Priya would stop at nothing to provide all three. Sitting side by side in the back of the ambulance, Priya held the girl's hand tightly, feeling the warmth of her skin against hers. For the first time in 7 years, she allowed herself to hope, not just for closure, but for a future where they could heal together. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it as a team. The hours that followed felt like a blur, each moment stretching and compressing in unpredictable ways. Priya sat beside the girl in a small, sterile room at the police station, their hands still clasped together, as if afraid to let go. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead added to the surreal atmosphere. Officers came and went, asking questions, taking notes, and occasionally glancing at them, with expressions ranging from curiosity to sympathy. For the girl, the process was overwhelming. She answered haltingly, her voice barely audible as she recounted fragments of her ordeal. She spoke of being taken from a crowded marketplace years ago, of living in various hidden locations, and of never knowing why she had been chosen or what would happen next. Her memories were patchy, clouded by fear and time, but one thing was clear: she had endured unimaginable hardship. Priya listened intently, her heart breaking with every word. Each detail painted a picture of a life stolen, of innocence shattered too soon. Yet amidst the pain, there were flickers of resilience in the girl's eyes, a quiet strength that reminded Priya so much of Anaya. It made her chest ache with both sorrow and hope. To confirm the girl's identity, authorities conducted DNA tests, promising results within a few days. In the meantime, Priya stayed by her side, unwilling to leave even for a moment. Social workers brought blankets, snacks, and warm drinks, doing their best to make the girl comfortable. One of them, a kind woman named Mira, knelt beside her and asked softly, "Do you remember your name?" The girl hesitated, then shook her head. "They called me Rena," she said quietly, "but I don't think that's my real name." Priya's breath hitched. Hearing the girl refer to herself as someone else felt like a punch to the gut. If this truly was Anaya, how could she help her reclaim her true identity after so many years? And if it wasn't, Priya pushed the thought away, refusing to entertain doubt just yet. As dawn broke outside, casting pale golden light through the window, an officer entered the room holding a folder. He exchanged a glance with his colleagues before addressing Priya. "We've reviewed the initial evidence," he began cautiously. "Based on your description and the circumstances, we believe there's a strong possibility this is your daughter." Priya's vision blurred with tears, and she turned to look at the girl. "Anaya," she whispered, testing the name aloud. "Is that you?" The girl frowned slightly, tilting her head as though trying to place the sound of it. Then, slowly, recognition flickered in her eyes. "Anaya," she repeated, rolling the syllables on her tongue. For a fleeting second, her expression softened, as if the name stirred something deep within her. But just as quickly, uncertainty returned. I'm not sure." "It's okay," Priya reassured her, squeezing her hand gently. "You don't have to remember everything right now. We'll figure it out together." By mid-morning, arrangements were made for temporary custody. Given the circumstances and the lack of any other known relatives, the authorities agreed to release the girl into Priya's care until the DNA results came back. As they left the police station, stepping into the crisp morning air, Priya felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. They were free, yes, but the road ahead was uncertain. Back at home, Priya guided the girl, still unsure whether to call her Anaya or Rena, through the familiar rooms of their house. She showed her the photo albums stacked neatly on a shelf, flipping through pages filled with smiling faces. When they reached a picture of a younger Anaya sitting on Arjun's shoulders, the girl stopped, staring at it intently. "That's me," she murmured, tracing the image with her finger. Her voice was soft, almost disbelieving, but there was no mistaking the spark of recognition in her eyes. Priya nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "That's you." In that moment, something shifted. Whether it was memory resurfacing or simply trust beginning to bloom, the connection between them grew stronger. They weren't whole yet, not fully, but they were on the path to healing. Together, the days that followed were a delicate dance of rediscovery and healing. Priya and the girl, now tentatively called Anaya again, spent hours sitting together in quiet companionship, piecing together fragments of the past. Some moments were filled with joy, like when Anaya recognized her favorite childhood song playing on the radio or laughed at a silly story Priya told about her mischievous antics as a toddler. Other moments were heavier, marked by tears and questions that had no easy answers. One evening, as they sat side by side on the living room couch, Anaya turned to Priya with a hesitant expression. "Do you think Papa is still alive?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fears and lingering hope. Priya's heart clenched. She had asked herself the same question countless times over the years, imagining scenarios where Arjun might still be out there, fighting to survive. But now, faced with Anaya's innocent curiosity, she chose her words carefully. "I don't know, Beta," she admitted, brushing a strand of hair from Anaya's face. "But if he is, I believe he would want us to stay strong for each other. And if something happened to him, then we'll honor his memory by being happy and taking care of one another." Anaya nodded slowly, absorbing her mother's words. Though the ache of not knowing lingered, it was softened by the bond they were rebuilding. Every shared meal, every bedtime story, every walk around the neighborhood brought them closer. Memories began to surface more frequently for Anaya, small flashes of her early childhood, snippets of laughter with her father, the warmth of family dinners. Each recollection felt like a gift, a thread stitching their broken lives back together. Meanwhile, the investigation into the trafficking ring continued, uncovering layers of corruption and cruelty that shocked even seasoned officers. Several arrests were made, including higher-ups who had orchestrated the operation. News reports highlighted the bravery of the whistleblower who had tipped off the police, a detail Priya kept to herself, knowing full well the risks she had taken that night in the alley. As weeks passed, the DNA results finally arrived, confirming what Priya's heart had known all along. The girl was indeed Anaya. When the officer delivered the news, Priya broke down in tears of relief, hugging her daughter tightly. Anaya clung to her, her own eyes brimming with emotion. "You're my ma," she said simply, her voice steady for the first time. "And I'm your Anaya." With the truth settled, life began to take on a new rhythm. Priya enrolled Anaya in school, where teachers marveled at her resilience and quick wit. Friends and neighbors welcomed them back into the community, offering support without prying too deeply into their painful history. Slowly but surely, their home transformed from a place of sorrow into one of hope and renewal. Yet, despite the progress, questions about Arjun remained unanswered. Priya refused to give up entirely, continuing to check in with investigators whenever possible. While part of her accepted that closure might never come, another part held on to the belief that miracles could happen, even after so many years. On a sunny afternoon, months after Anaya's return, Priya stood in the garden planting flowers alongside her daughter. As they worked side by side, dirt smudging their hands and smiles lighting their faces, Priya realized something profound. Life hadn't returned to how it once was. It couldn't, but it had found a way to move forward. Together, they were creating new memories, building a future rooted in love and strength. "Ma," Anaya said suddenly, holding up a freshly planted sapling. "This one's for Papa, okay?" Priya blinked back tears, nodding. "Yes, Beta. For Papa." In that moment, surrounded by blossoms and sunlight, Priya understood that while some wounds never fully heal, they can become part of a greater story, one of survival, connection, and enduring love.